Alrighty. Good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Green Party Annual National Meeting plenary speech. This year, the keynote speech will be about ballot access, which is a topic that is dear to me. My name is Tom Yeager. I'm the former co-chair of the Ballot Access Committee. I served as co-chair during both the 2012 and the 2016 presidential campaigns. My work to get our party on the ballot is one of the things that I'm proudest of as a Green. I'm here to introduce Richard Winger, who's today's keynote speaker. Richard is a publisher and editor of Ballot Access News, a monthly newsletter that began in 1985. It covers developments in ballot access law, especially those that affect U.S. minor parties. It is vital information about petition requirements and deadlines and about the number of registered Greens by state. In 1985, Richard and other minor party representatives started the Coalition on Free and Open Elections for coordinated action and mutual support among minor parties around reforming ballot access laws. For years, he has given the Green Party a great deal of helpful advice on matters related to ballot access laws. He has played an important role in our ballot access successes, which allowed more voters to show their support for and to elect Green candidates. Over the past few decades, Richard has been one of the foremost advocates of real democracy in this country, not the managed democracy that Democrats and Republicans want us to have. He is going to discuss recent changes in ballot access laws. As important as it is to organize and petition onto the ballot, it is also essential to work to make ballot access laws less repressive through lawsuits and legislation. I'm very grateful to have Richard speak to us today.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tom. Every day I worry about the Green Party in North Carolina and the pending lawsuit to overcome the injustice done so far by the Democrats and the North Carolina Board of Elections. I was cheered up this morning when I looked at the North Carolina Board of Elections webpage. North Carolina posts voter registration data every week, every Saturday morning. And in just 3 weeks, which is the 3 weeks when there's been so much publicity about the Green Party being kicked off the ballot in North Carolina, the Democrats have declined 2,838 registrations, and the Republicans have gone down 478. The independents have gone down the independents have gone up 4,198, and the Libertarians have gone up 78. So I think in just 3 weeks, it's kind of surprising to me that the Democrats would lose almost 3,000 registrants. Maybe these people are reading what's going on and getting mad at the Democratic Party. I also see that the Democratic National Committee's lawyer, who's in charge of trying to kick the Green Party off the ballot, has a daily web email, and he always discusses developments in election law every day. And he has not, his name is Mark Elias, I think. It's either Elias or Elias, I'm not sure. And he has not mentioned what he's doing in North Carolina. I guess he doesn't think it's good publicity for the Democratic Party. But my purpose here today is to try and persuade Green Party activists of the importance of lobbying state legislatures for better ballot access laws. And I can predict when I say that, you're probably thinking, oh, that's hopeless. And I'm here to show you objectively it's not hopeless. Between 1976 and the current time, ballot access laws have substantially improved. They've had major setbacks in California and Washington state because of the adoption of the top two system. But setting that aside, things are much better than they used to be. And the main reason is minor party lobbying. And I'm going to go through particular instances of success. And then when there's time, maybe in the second half, we can talk about how to do it. But I want to tell you that in 1976, before there had been much lobbying, the median vote test for a party to stay on the ballot was 5%. In the average state, you had to get 5% of the vote or they kick you off the ballot. You'd have to start all over again. Today, the median vote test is only 2%. That's a huge improvement. And it makes it possible for our parties to stay in the ballot much more often and not have to re-petition. Also, the number of signatures to get on the ballot for president in all states has substantially declined lately. I'm going to reach for a reference. In fact, I'm just going to give a whole overview of what's happened to ballot access ever since the beginning of government printed ballots. In 1892, which is the first year when there were ballot access laws, a party could get its presidential candidate in the ballot in all the states with 38,601 signatures, which is about 1/3 of 1% of the vote cast for president. It remained under 50,000 through 1912. Then it almost doubled in 1916. Things were getting bad fast. In 1928, it was 74,000, but in 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression, it had more than doubled to 156,000. It kept going up, up, up. By 1964, it was 920,000. And then it dropped, but then it started going up again. But I'm happy to say that in 2016, it was only 619,000, which was only 45/100ths of 1%. And then in 2020, it dropped to only 568,000, which was 36/100ths of 1%. So we've reversed it. The worst, the absolute worst in percentage terms was 1952 when it was 1.08%. And now we've got it down to 0.36%. Although I must admit, it's somewhat artificially low because in 2020, we got relief in some states because of COVID. So why did it go steadily worse, 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 worse? And why is it getting better? It's because of lobbying. In the period before 1973, minor parties simply did not lobby state legislatures. I know this because I've read all the past issues of the Socialist Party's weekly newspaper, the Socialist Labor Party's weekly newspaper, the Communist Party's weekly and then daily newspaper. They simply didn't go to the legislatures and say, look, this isn't fair. It's violation of democratic ideals. Please change it. So when you don't fight back in the legislatures, things get bad. Since about 1973, there has been a lot of minor party lobbying and it's paid off. I don't want to be boring. I absolutely despise being boring, but I'm still going to give you some particular instances of successes. All these successes were a result of lobbying. They were not a result of court cases. In 1973, the District of Columbia City Council cut the minor party presidential petition from 5% of the number of registered voters, which is terribly burdensome, to 1%. In 1975, the South Dakota legislature cut the independent deadline from 2% to 1%. In 1976, after a mammoth lobbying effort, California improved the independent petition, which had been 5% of the last vote cast, and you couldn't sign if you voted in the primary, to 1% of the number of registered voters. It was still very tough. It was still 100,000, but it made a big difference because the Communist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, and the Libertarian Party were all able to get their presidential candidates on the ballot in California in 1976. They wouldn't have had a chance otherwise. it was still too tough for them to qualify as parties. In 1977, the Maine legislature cut the statewide minor party and independent petition from 3% of the last vote cast to exactly 2,000. Later, they doubled it. That was still a big improvement. In 1981, Montana added a procedure with a single petition, you could qualify the party. Before that, all you had to have was separate independent candidate petitions. In 1983, New Mexico cut the nominee petition for qualified minor parties from 3% of the last vote cast to 0.5%, although later they raised it to 1%. In 1984, Kansas cut the minor party petition from 3% to 2%. In 1985, Idaho cut it from 3% to 2%. In 1986, Georgia lowered the 2.5% of the number of registered voters for statewide office to 1%. And they greatly improved the vote test, although it only applies to statewide office. They lowered it from 20% to 1% of the number of registered voters. Oregon made a huge improvement in 1989. They lowered the vote test from 5% to 1%. New York in 1992 cut the statewide petition from 20,000 to 15,000. Missouri made a huge improvement in 1993. They cut the minor party and independent petition from about 25,000 signatures with a severe distribution requirement to exactly 10,000 with no distribution requirement. Connecticut in 1994 cut it from 1%, which is about 15,000, to exactly 7,500. And Maryland in 1998 lowered the petition from 3% of the number of registered voters to 1%. And 1998 was a great year. Florida voters passed an initiative. Well, technically it wasn't an initiative. The Constitutional Revision Committee put it on the ballot, but it wiped out mandatory petitions for minor party candidates. And Colorado changed the vote test from 10% to 1%. 1998 was a wonderful year. Oh, and Wyoming cut the petition from 8,000 to 2%, which is about 4,000. Montana eased the new party petition in 1999 from about 16,000 to exactly 5,000. Minnesota in 2001 changed the vote test so it only needs to be met every other election. Michigan in 2002, we really worked hard on this one. The old Michigan law said the vote test applied to the topmost nominee of your party. So if you ran for president, you had to get a number of votes equal to 1% of the winner's vote, which we can do sometimes, but not always. They changed it so the vote test applies to the highest nominee of that party, which makes it a breeze to stay on the ballot in Michigan, because they have these obscure statewide partisan offices for education, and any minor party can get that number of votes. So it saves having to repetition in Michigan. Arizona, it's a terribly evil state, but they have made some improvements over the year. In 2006, they changed the petition for a new party from 2% of the last vote cast to just 2% of the gubernatorial vote, which is much easier. Then later they eased it again. In West Virginia in 2009, they cut the petition from 2% to 1%, and they moved the petition deadline from May to August. Oh yeah, in 2011, Arizona said the vote test only has to be met every other election, which again is a big help. In 2012, Nebraska also said the vote test only has to be met every other election. It's much easier to meet the vote test in a midterm year because there's all these unimportant statewide offices like auditor, treasurer, And a Green can typically get 5% for an office like that. But in a presidential year, it's just about impossible. Virginia in 2013 cut the presidential petition from 10,000 to 5,000. California, and this is where the Green Party did much of the work. In 2014, the Green Party and the Peace and Freedom Party did all the work for Assembly Bill 2351. Because of the top two system, it was under the old law, we could no longer get 2% of the vote for a statewide race in the general election, which is what we had to do to stay on the ballot. This bill said, okay, we know you guys can't get on the general election ballot anymore due to the horrible top two system. So if you get 2% in the primary, that counts also. And even more important, it lowered the number of registrations from 1% of the last gubernatorial vote to 1/3% of the number of registered voters. If that bill hadn't passed, the Green Party would have needed 103,000 registrations to stay on the ballot in California. And the Green Party doesn't quite have that. So that bill saved the Green Party's party status in California. Oklahoma made several big improvements in 2015, 2016. It lowered the vote test from 10% for president or governor, which is just impossible to meet, to 2.5% for any statewide race at either of the last two elections. They also lowered the party petition from a horrible 5% of the last vote cast to 3% of the last presidential vote. That's still way too high. Oklahoma is one of the few states where the Green Party has never appeared on the ballot for president. But if you can ever get on the ballot, it'll be easy to stay on, because polling 2.5% for a piddly little office like corporation commissioner is a breeze. South Dakota lowered the party petition in 2018 from 2.5% to 1%. Texas in 2019 passed a very eccentric law. The old vote test was 5% for any statewide race, and you had to meet it every 2 years. And it was fairly easy to get 5% in races with only one major party, but very tough to get it otherwise. So this new law says, okay, the vote test is just 2%, and you only have to meet it every 5th election. And North Carolina in 2017 lowered the party petition from 2% of the last gubernatorial vote to 1/4 of 1% of the last gubernatorial vote, which is the only reason the Green Party qualified for the first time in North Carolina ever in 2018 and 2020. The law also said you're also a party if your presidential nominee was on the ballot in the last presidential election in 35 states. And that worked for the Green Party. It didn't have to petition because Jill Stein was on the ballot in more than 35 states. So the party, and unfortunately in 2020, Howie Hawkins was not on the ballot in 35 states. So the party had to petition. And I know you all know the story of the 2022 party petition and the fight that's going on around that. And finally, just this year, the Alaska legislature lowered the definition of a party from a group that has registration equal to 3% of the last vote cast to exactly 5,000 registrations. So I hope that wasn't boring. I hope it's not boring, because it's good news. You see, this is what we have accomplished, and we could accomplish more with more lobbying. I feel a little uneasy just talking and talking without anyone interrupting me, commenting. I'll keep going, but if there's a procedure for Tom or anyone else to ask questions or break in, please use it. I'm going to go through some arguments to use when lobbying. Now, this first one may be controversial, maybe you won't feel comfortable saying this, but in my opinion, we should rebut the idea that parties of the left always, quote, take votes away from Democrats. Howie was good enough to find the 2016 exit poll data for Jill Stein, and it showed, and by the way, exit polls are the gold standard for research. 25% of the voters who voted for Jill Stein said if she hadn't been on the ballot or if she hadn't been running, they would have voted for Hillary Clinton. 14% said in that case, they would have voted for Donald Trump. 61% said they just wouldn't have voted. Either they wouldn't have gone to the polls or they would have left President blank. So this rebuts Democratic charges that Jill Stein in 2016 caused Donald Trump to win. The closest margin for the states that Trump carried in 2016 was Michigan, which he carried by 10,704 votes. Now, when you apply these percentages from the exit poll to the Jill Stein voters, that shows Hillary only lost a net of 5,000 votes. And so that was less than the margin. There's plenty of other evidence that left parties and left candidates don't necessarily hurt Democrats. In 2004, I'm going to talk about Ralph Nader. He was an independent candidate that year, as you know. The country's 3 leading pollsters all had extra questions for any poll respondents who said they were for Nader. They said, well, if Nader weren't on the ballot or he weren't running, who would you vote for? Well, they were surprised. All 3 of them independently found that to a slight degree, more Nader voters said they'd vote for Bush than Kerry. And this is on the October 22nd, 2004 front page of the Washington Post. And I analyzed the 2004 election returns myself and independently agreed with that. I found that in most states, 2/3 of the states, Nader's best county was a county that was more pro-Bush than that state as a whole. Then there's the wonderful evidence from the 1948 election when the 3 major candidates across the country were Thomas Dewey, the Republican, Harry Truman, the Democrat, and Henry Wallace, the former vice president, who was the Progressive Party nominee. Everybody assumed Wallace being in the race would hurt Truman, but Samuel Lubell, who was a pollster who later became a distinguished political science professor, he studied that and he found not only did Wallace not hurt Truman, if Wallace hadn't been in the race, Truman would have lost. And the way he explained it was there were 2 million, mostly Catholic voters who had voted Republican in 1944 because they were intensely anti-communist. And they saw, and the whole world saw, that in 1944, the Communist Party, which had dissolved itself into a political association, had endorsed Franklin Roosevelt. So that made them dislike Roosevelt. In 1948, the Communist Party, which had sprung back into life, was vehemently attacking Truman and boosting Wallace. So all these 2 million voters felt comfortable coming back to the Democratic Party.
Sure.
And then there's something that's experimental. There's a book called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, Ariely. He's a psychologist. He did experiments on people, lots of them. It's all peer reviewed. And he found that when there are 3 choices and 2 of them are somewhat similar, and the third one is quite different, among the 2 that are somewhat similar, if one of them appears superior to the other, that gives that supposedly superior choice an advantage over the third choice. it may not seem intuitive, but he has lots and lots of experiments and it works every time. Now, I do not mean to say that the Green Party is in any way inferior to the Democratic Party, absolutely not. But for purposes of the experiment, if people perceive that the Democratic Party and the Green Party are sort of on the same side in some big issue, they will, this theory would predict that that helps the Democratic Party in its fight with the Republican Party. And if you want to read the book, I hope you will. There's one more example. In 1936, the Communist Party was in favor of Franklin D. Roosevelt, his reelection, because they liked the New Deal. They thought it was good for working people. So you might think, oh, well, in that case, they're not going to run a candidate of their own. Just the opposite. And they were very savvy people in politics. They had a very energetic presidential campaign for Earl Browder, but he went around the country praising the New Deal. This is their opinion that a second voice praising the New Deal was good for Roosevelt. And who's to say? That's probably enough on rebutting the spoiler argument. And there's plenty of other good arguments to make. Our mother country is Great Britain. Great Britain says anybody can be on the ballot for Parliament with 10 signatures and a deposit, a fee of £500. And they don't have any problem with crowded ballots. In Great Britain, the Green Party is therefore able to get on the ballot for Parliament in every single district. I think it stays out of Northern Ireland, but for the rest of the United Kingdom, there's no ballot access problem for the Green Party of Great Britain. It's unfortunate England doesn't have proportional representation, but at least the Green Party is in the field in every British election and included in the debates. Canada, the country that is more similar to the United States than any other, in my opinion. Anybody can get on the ballot with 100 signatures and a fee of 1,000 Canadian dollars, which they get back if they pull a certain share of the vote. So also in Canada, the Green Party has no ballot access problem, regularly appears on the ballot in almost every single constituency, and is included in the leader debates. Our own history shows that we don't need these ballot access requirements. There were no government printed ballots before 1888, therefore there were no ballot access laws. People could make their own ballot. The government had no ability to prevent anyone from running, and it was fine. You know, we had a perfectly reasonable ballot in this country. It was not a problem of overcrowded ballots. Furthermore, I've done research and I want to make it available to anyone who requests it. I have an article here which shows that in the entire history of United States ballot access laws, there's almost no instances when a state that required more than 5,000 signatures had a crowded ballot. In other words, a crowded ballot I define as one with more than 8 candidates for a single office. I got that from a US Supreme Court concurring opinion in Williams versus Rhodes. Justice Harlan said he didn't think having 8 candidates on the ballot would confuse anybody. And it's obvious true. I mean, look at people go to restaurants all the time and the menus have far more choices than that. So if a state requires more than 5,000 signatures, it will never have more than 8 candidates. There's only 3 exceptions. There were 2 instances for governor of New York when there were 10 candidates at a time when the requirement was 15,000. And there's also 2 for president. But that's such a small number of exceptions, it's almost non-existent. So I have 50 copies of this. I will send one to anybody who wants it. You can contact me probably most easily with email. My email is very simple to remember. It's my name, all run together, richardwinger@yahoo.com. And I'll be happy to distribute these. What am I going to do with 50 copies? And I think if you're lobbying, you don't necessarily need to show it to legislators, but if you read it for yourself, you will have the inner confidence that it's true. So I've talked to the libertarian who got the Missouri ballot access bill through the Missouri legislature, and he's told me some of the techniques he used. I'd like to share them with you. The 50% of the struggle to get a bill through is finding a sponsor. So my friend Ken Bush wisely chose a Republican sponsor and a Democratic sponsor. Then he's a very personable person. It helps to have somebody doing this who's got kind of likes people, would be good at sales. He's very good natured. He knows how to get along with people. He would do things like research key legislators that he needed to influence, find out what they were interested in, what their occupation was, what church they were in. And then he would look around for libertarians and members of other parties that were helping him, and just friends or associations, and try to find someone who had something in common with that legislator, who would contact them in support of the bill and try to get this friendly relationship here. This, I think, works much better in states with legislative districts that have a small population. He camped out in the sponsor's office. They let him have a little corner so he could be there all day. And he would just go around the Capitol and try to find appointments with legislators and talk to them. He even found the former legislator who 40 years earlier had written and passed the restrictive ballot access law that Missouri had passed in 1953. This guy was still alive and willing to help. And he said, yes, that bill of mine was a mistake, and I endorse your bill. And so that was helpful. He showed that. The guy put it on his own stationery. Ken got editorials from some big newspapers in support of the bill. You know, it's not that hard, I believe, to get an editorial if you meet with the editorial staff and make the case. Let's see. He made the case that if minor parties aren't allowed in the ballot in Missouri, and they hadn't been for 40 years, that way that forces people who would otherwise be in minor parties to infiltrate the major parties. Some of them are kind of unsavory. And so he made that point. He pointed out that Republican Party was not being helped by having David Duke as a Republican legislator in Louisiana. And of course, when you lobby, it's best to set up an umbrella group. It's best if the bill isn't perceived as helping just one particular minor party. So if you set up a coalition for fair ballot access, print up stationery, and have several minor parties involved with it, that helps. Oh, and he got the Secretary of State to endorse the bill. And it's not unreasonable to expect election officials to endorse bills to improve ballot access, because especially if it makes it easier for a party to stay in the ballot, that means less petitions come in that have to be checked. And it costs government over $1 per signature to check a signature. And that can be a considerable expense. It's a big headache too. So I feel uncomfortable just blabbing away. So I think I should stop now, don't you think?
That's good.
I can't hear anything. But anyway.
Okay, Richard.
Howie Hawkins found the exit poll data. You can Google it. Howie will be talking at the workshop, but I think if you just Google it, you can find it. Exit poll 2016.
Richard. Let's see, there's one thing that helped us in 2012 when we were lobbying in Virginia was that, I'm sorry, 2013, was that in 2012, there was a pretty substantial petition to get on the ballot for the presidential primaries. And what happened was it required 10,000 signatures to get on as like as a Republican or a Democrat to get on the presidential primary ballot. And basically what happened was Newt Gingrich had an epic fail there. And the only two candidates were Mitt Romney and Ron Paul, who were neither of whom was well liked by a lot of Republican voters. So what happened was we actually had the support of the Republican Party in 2013 when they reduced the signature requirement for the primary petitions. They also did it for us too. Our general election petition requirement was the same as the primary petition for them, and they reduced it to 5,000 for us as well.
You're right. We were very lucky. We didn't earn that. It was a gift. Of course, they could have fixed it for the presidential primary and not fixed it for the general election, but fortunately, they didn't do that. I would really love to see a major lobbying effort in Virginia over their definition of a qualified party. It's a vote of 10%. There's only 2 states in the country with a 10% vote test. All the others are smaller percentages, except that unfortunately Alabama's 20%. I think if by a group of minor party activists gathered into a coalition in Virginia and went around to the big newspapers of Virginia, I think they could get editorials saying, why should we be so out of step with the rest of the country? The median state has a vote test of 2%. All of our neighbors have easier ballot access vote tests. Kentucky's 2%, Tennessee's 2.5%, North Carolina is 2% or on the ballot in 35 states. Maryland is 1%. West Virginia is 1%. I just don't know what principled opposition there could be to changing that repressive 10%. In fact, for practically every state in the country that needs improvements, and 3/4 of them do, I have some concept in my head of what we could ask for. So I would love to work with anybody who decides to lobby. And I'm just going to say one more thing about Missouri. Ken Bush did it all by himself. You might think we need a strong organization in a state to lobby successfully. That's not true. If you have one person who just is into it, one person can make a difference. And by the way, thanks very much to the person who flashed the exit poll link.
Oh, Richard. Richard, another thing that can help is not just lobbying to lower the vote test, but also to broaden it. Like, for example, Arkansas, we need to get 3%. We need to get 3% for president in years divisible by 4, and governor. It's only governor in years that are like the midterm years. And we got in 2006, we got like about 4% for lieutenant governor. In 2008, because there was no Republican running, we got 20% for Rebecca Kennedy for Senate. In 2010, there was no Republican running for treasurer. We got like 33% for that, but none of it mattered. And we just have to keep petitioning over and over and over again. And eventually that broke the party. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had progress. North Dakota used to be just governor, and then they expanded it to president, and then they expanded it to secretary of state and attorney general. And South Dakota expanded it from just governor to any statewide race. Oklahoma did the same thing. So it's a very good thing to ask for, and it might work. Now, I know Arkansas is tough. Another thing I've learned, some states are really, really tough. But what works in the tough states is persistence. If you get a bill introduced every single session of the legislature, eventually, that's how we got Oklahoma. It took 20 years of lobbying in Oklahoma before they relented. 20 years. So, and we had a bill every session. So I recommend persistence. And I know there's a lot of nice messages flashing here, and sometimes I mean to respond to them, but then they go away and I forget what they are. So try again if I forgot.
Richard, there's a couple questions for you. Let's see. One which is, can you identify a few states where the National Party and others interested in helping out might concentrate their efforts for gaining ballot access?
Maybe I didn't hear the very first part of the question. Say it again.
Can you identify a few states where the National Party and others interested in helping out might concentrate their efforts in gaining ballot access? Like, you know, the key states for us to focus on.
Well, okay, it should probably be a state where you've never been able to get on the ballot for president. There's only a handful. There's Indiana, but we have a lawsuit there. And let's see, Oklahoma, we've talked about Oklahoma. The thing is, it should probably be a state with a, despite what I said about one person can do it, it should probably be a state with a moderately strong Green Party state organization. So you might be in a better position to answer that question than me.
Richard, how about New York? I mean, like a Cuomo and his pals basically tripled the petition requirement there, and it's now 45,000, which is it's one of the worst in the country. It used 15,000 used to be very reasonable, but they tripled it, basically to get back at the Working Families Party, but also but they got us in the process too.
Well, I think one of the workshops later today will include Howie Hawkins, and I think Howie has been lobbying in New York, and he knows a whole lot more about it than I do. But I have a feeling that he says there is support for reforming it, just not this year. For some reason, politicians always think, well, this election is extremely important and we'll fix it later. But I think Howie can answer that better than I can.
There's another question here. Like, what happens like when to ballot access when parties fuse? For example, like when the Green and the Rainbow parties fused in Massachusetts.
Well, the Rainbow Party was never a ballot qualified party, so it didn't make any difference at all. All it did was, after the merger, the Green Party of Massachusetts had a slightly different name than the Green parties of other states, but it didn't have any effect on ballot access. Now, I just saw a message, but I didn't get it. I didn't read it before it went away.
Let's see here. And there's, let's see if there's any more questions here. Okay. Let's see. Okay, those are the all. Can we unmute Sarah Dillon, please? She has a question. It's not showing up in the chat.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. This is Sarah Dillon. I'm one of the National Committee delegates from the Indiana Green Party. All I just posted is that for anyone that wants to help donate for our lawsuit, I posted in the chat the donation link. And we've been lobbying for years to revive Indiana's ballot access law. Not very successful, and of course we have a super majority of Republicans in our legislature, so that's another entirely different beast. But like I said, I posted in the chat if you want to donate to our lawsuit, and just post that you that you're donating towards that when you click on any of the donation links.
I know you've had the bill introduced in Indiana quite a few times, but I have and I could be wrong, I don't know, but I have a feeling there was no fanatic from the Green Party in Indiana who was willing to go spend time in Indianapolis and talk to legislators the way Ken Bush did. And you have to have someone who likes doing that.
Right.
I think the reason the left parties in the early 20th century didn't do any lobbying is they had such contempt for the major party legislators, they wouldn't even try. And
Well, we did have a our previous Secretary of State candidate, Dr. George Wolf, who was our Secretary of State candidate in 2018. The Secretary of State's race is the ballot line race here in Indiana. We do have another candidate named David Wetter that's running this year. But George Wolf and a bunch of others have gone to the General Assembly and lobbied for years. The closest it got out of the state Senate got to third reading, and it was defeated on third reading. And our friends in the Libertarian Party were also targets in 2020.
Yeah,
so,
somebody wanted me to say that the Libertarian Party is a co-plaintiff in the Indiana Green Party lawsuit, even though the Libertarian Party is on the ballot. I think Ohio would be a very good place for intensive lobbying, and I think the Libertarian Party would help maybe other parties. Ohio, it's very strange. Historically, some states were tough from the very beginning. I have no idea why. And these traditions persist even after everybody involved has died long ago. California and Ohio and Nevada were very tough with ballot access in the very beginning, way back in the 1890s. And for some reason, it just lasts and lasts. Ohio has been sued and lost on ballot access 3 times in the US Supreme Court. And they ought to know better. But I have a feeling that there's never been a really, really energetic push to lobby in Ohio, ever. We did have a bill one year, and I just don't think people worked hard enough on it. Let's see.
Richard, there's a question here from Gloria Matera. She's asking about New York State. Let's see here. She was asking.
I think she asked about a model election law.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, model election law.
Well, everybody's got their own opinion, but New York is about as far from a model as can be. 39 states have a procedure by which a group can transform itself into an unqualified party before it's chosen any candidates. And that's wonderful. And in most cases, you can circulate this petition or registration drive, whatever it is, anytime you want. You can start as early as you want. New York doesn't have that. New York doesn't even understand what it's missing. People in New York just don't know that New York is one of the few states where you can't turn a group into a qualified party anytime before an election. Uh-oh, she says that was not my question exactly. Go ahead, Gloria, flash it again.
Okay, can we unmute Gloria, please?
Thank you. Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Nice to see you. My question is, we have been lobbying, and I know Howie will talk about this later, but we're all together now. And, you know, our lobbying was both on our effort and as a coalition with libertarians and independent candidates. So we got a lot of sympathy, but not any traction, as you said, not this year. That's how Howie's looking at it. But we actually, particularly Howie, with some other people participating, wrote draft legislation, basically similar back to what we had before the restrictive changes, but even better. And we've been presenting that. So my question is, does it help to have a draft piece of legislation to bring to these legislators? Does it help to give them something they can work with, or, you know, are we waiting for them to put something together?
Yes, that's an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked that. In my example of Missouri, Ken Bush he presented the legislators with what we wanted. He wrote it up, and they were so impressed with it. They sent it to legislative council, but they said, well, this is worded just fine. We don't even need to tinker with it. Unfortunately, the bills in Indiana have been really silly bills. I don't understand. I hate to put down anybody that worked on Indiana lobbying, but I've said it. We should have drafted a bill for Indiana and presented it to them, because what the legislator who was on our side introduced just was very badly worded. Oh, David Rockello, you don't need to worry about what libertarians think about the issues, because libertarians can be good partners in this limited project. And, you know, the Green Party has been in some lawsuits with the Constitution Party. And if you think you have disagreements with the Libertarian Party, well, it's far worse with the Constitution Party. But anyway, the Green Party of Tennessee and the Constitution Party of Tennessee were in several lawsuits together. Didn't seem to bother anybody. By the way, as to Ohio, there's a chance we can get court relief in Ohio, because the Sixth Circuit ruled a few years ago that Michigan's independent statewide petition of 30,000 was too difficult. That was an amazing victory. It's called the Graveline case. And Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee comprise the Sixth Circuit. And now that we've won against Michigan in the Sixth Circuit, that 30,000, given its track record of hardly anyone ever doing it, is too hard. There's a potential to sue both Tennessee over its horrible party petition, which has never been used, and the Ohio petition, which hasn't been used except for Americans elect in a long time. Oh, right, Hawaii. We had great lobbying in Hawaii. It used to be the vote test to stay on the ballot in Hawaii was 10% for a statewide race or US House. And because of mainly libertarian lobbying, we got that vote test drastically improved. You can, if you've been on the ballot for 3 elections in a row, you get the next 5 elections for free, regardless of how few votes you get. Also, you can also stay on, you can meet the vote test if you get 2% of the vote in all the state Senate races put together, or 4% for the state House races together. Plus, our lobbying in Hawaii got the party petition reduced from 1% of the number of registered voters to 1/10 of 1%. So that Hawaii is a beautiful example of how lobbying works. Well, okay, Ohio also has the initiative process. It takes an awful lot of money, but there's always the possibility of improving ballot access laws in the states with a statewide initiative. We've done it twice and it worked both times. In Massachusetts in 1990, a coalition of minor parties got an initiative on the ballot, lowering the petition from 2% of the last gubernatorial vote, which is about, it ranged from 40,000 to 60,000, down to 1/2 of 1%. And it passed. That was huge. There's still huge problems in Massachusetts, but we're so much better off than we were before 1990. By the way, the newspapers were all on our side, but the TV and radio stations were against us. They didn't want more candidates in the ballot because they thought they'd have to expand their coverage, I guess. Oh, and the other instance when the vote of the people determined what the ballot access law should be was Florida in 1998. Florida used to be the worst state in the country for ballot access. The presidential petition was 1% of the number of registered voters, which was bad enough, but the petition for all other office was 3% of the registered voters, which was about 200,000 signatures. And it didn't matter how many votes you got, there was no vote test. Instead, you couldn't stay on the ballot unless you had registration membership of 5%, which is just out of the question. So there's something in Florida called the Constitutional Revision Commission. And every 10 years, they go around the state and they hold hearings all over the place. And they invite the public and say, hey, what improvements in the Florida Constitution would you like? Our coalition had people at every single meeting, every time, improve the ballot access laws. It worked. After the commission heard that so many times, they put in their measure of something in the Florida Constitution that ballot access has to be equal. Therefore, since Democrats and Republicans don't need a petition, again, on the primary ballot, there's no petitioning for minor party candidates either. The trouble in Florida is the horribly huge filing fees. But anyway, the voters passed it. Boy, that 1998 was a terrific year.
Richard, I would say that one of the good features of the Utah and the Nevada ballot access laws is that they have you can actually get statewide ballot access with a local candidate. Like, for example, the Nevada petition is somewhat difficult to actually complete, but like if you run for countywide office in Nevada, like, Clark County is like 70% of the population. You get like 1.5% in a partisan countywide race, which would be about 1% of the total congressional vote, which is required. You get 1.5% in a local race, then you've got like a statewide ballot access. That would be a feature that would be very helpful. I mean, like, I would think.
You're right, although that's kind of especially helpful to Nevada uniquely among the 50 states. There's really no big advantage to that in a typical state. But as you said, with one county having 70% of the population, that's quite useful. And I saw a message about Florida, Santa's land, and I agree totally. In fact, even though we got ballot access relief in Florida, it's a terribly authoritarian state. They recently passed a bill saying that a party can't run somebody for any partisan office who hasn't been a member of that party for a full calendar year before filing. Well, the People's Party only became a qualified party in Florida in September 2021. They have a very good candidate for county commission in Pasco County. And she can't run because of that law. The irony is she couldn't have been registered in the People's Party for a full year because the party didn't exist. And in Florida won't recognize the ability of a voter to register into an unqualified party. And the Supreme Court already said in Tasjian versus Republican Party of Connecticut that it violates freedom of association for any state to tell a party that it can't nominate a non-member. And yet we got a horrible, horrible judge for the People's Party, and he will not give them any relief. So they've asked for rehearing, and he's just sat on it for 10 days. So yeah, there's a lot of authoritarian tendencies in Florida. As I see the message here about the Wild West in Ohio, and it's true. But anyway, when a federal court comes down in Ohio, they obey. It's just the state Supreme Court they've been very disrespectful to.
Okay.
I see a question about ranked choice voting and single transferable voting. There's a bill in Congress for single transferable voting by Congressman Don Bayer of Virginia, Democrat. And that's a wonderful bill. There's no publicity about it. There's plenty of other bills in Congress that are far less important. And it makes me sad that Don Bayer's bill, I think it's HR 3863, is just sitting there. But if we could get that through, we would have a form of proportional representation in many, if not most states for US House. But last I checked, it only had 6 co-sponsors. I'm not putting down any of the other election law bills in Congress either. I'm especially not putting down the brand new bill to amend the 1887 Electoral Count Act. That's very important. Of course, every Democrat agrees with that. I'm reading the note from Lisa Taylor here. Maybe you could be allowed to speak and tell us more about it.
Okay. Let's see if I can unmute her. Let's see her. Lisa Taylor. Just a minute. Let's see her.
Oh, well. Maybe we could Google Malinowski and find out more about it.
We'll unmute. Let's see here. Lisa Taylor. Okay, she's unmute. Let's see, about to unmute. Let's see, unmute. Can we unmute Lisa Taylor, please?
I can't unmute Lisa. I did cue that.
Hello. Hi.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I don't know that much more about it. It was on Amanpour and Company on PBS this week. I got it. The congressman listed had an op-ed in the New York Times. So look up the New York Times article.
Okay.
Which state has the best third-party ballot access?
I guess Vermont and Mississippi. You know, this could be something you use when you lobby. Mississippi wrote its ballot access law in 1890, and they said a party is any group that turns in a list of its officers and bylaws and holds a convention. It's worked fine. They don't have an overcrowded ballot. Nobody has to check petitions. Nobody has to petition in Mississippi. It's just amazing that we should talk about these good states some more. I'm glad somebody said that. Vermont says a party is any body that's got town committees in any 10 towns, and a town committee can be as few as 2 people. That's surprisingly hard. The Green Party's had trouble with that, but there's a lot of competition in Vermont on the left with the Working Families Party and especially the Progressive Party.
Now, New Jersey is not good for party access because you need to get 10% of the total legislative votes. But the petitions are pretty easy.
That's right. It's hard to get really furious at New Jersey when nobody ever needs more than 800 valid signatures. But you're right, the definition of a party is outrageously difficult. It hasn't been used by anybody except Democrats and Republicans since 1920.
And Oklahoma's party petition is difficult, but if you whip out a check for a couple $1,000s, you're on the ballot for governor. They operate by filing fees there if it's for independents. If you can get on as an independent, you don't get the G after your name, but the filing fees are really not too bad there compared to the party petition.
Yeah, Oklahoma needs more work. You can get on as a party for president if you pay $35,000, which is unfortunately, the Green Party of Oklahoma had a lawsuit against the amount on the grounds that it was discriminatory because no other filing fee, I don't think, was more than $2,500. And the states are supposed to go easier for president, not harder. But we had bad luck. That law was in effect for the first time in 2020, and 3 people paid the $35,000. So that kind of wrecked the lawsuit. We dropped it. The 3 people were Brock Pierce, and Kanye West, and a woman whose name I've forgotten. She was an entertainer. I guess she was wealthy. So that was disgusting. I missed a few messages here. They come so fast. Are there any, if there's anyone here from Kansas who'd like to speak about their lobbying, I'd like to hear it. Is anyone on from Kansas? Yes, a lawsuit would be possible for Oklahoma, but they just say, oh, what are you complaining about? The Libertarians are on, and we had 3 other presidential candidates on in 2020. So that was 6 candidates. I'm afraid it wouldn't be worth pursuing. Nobody from Kansas, too bad, because they have tried. They've gotten bills introduced, I think, 3 or 4 times.
Let's see. Other questions?
Well, I don't know if you people are wanting to get up and take a break or not. I'm not used to speaking so long, and I'm sort of out of stuff, but if you want to keep this going, that's fine. Okay, do you think there's a cornerstone state? Whoops, I went away too fast. Somebody had a good question, but I didn't get to finish reading it.
Hey, Richard, the question was, do you think there's a cornerstone state where winning ballot access would have a tipping point effect? That comes from Margaret Elizabeth, one of our national co-chairs.
I think New York. And by the way, we are in court in New York. In fact, the Second Circuit is going to hear the case on an expedited basis in early September. So if we're lucky, if we get good judges, they might enjoin the law.
We also have a question from Ellie Yarden.
Yes, Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a one-party state that allows Democrats occasionally to become governor because they can control them. But the main control is through the House. How does one deal with the resistance to having the Green Rainbow Party not have to repeat the same stupid exercise every 4 years?
Yeah, Massachusetts has two problems. You alluded to one of them. When we wrote our initiative in 1990, we should have thought to change that so that you only have to meet the vote test every other election, because we can get the 3% in midterm years generally, but it's real tough in presidential years. The other huge flaw in Massachusetts is the extremely unjust law and how a candidate gets in the primary of a ballot qualified small party. There's 3 states with that flaw: Massachusetts, Maine, and Arizona. They have really, really rough petitions for a Green to get on the primary ballot of the Green Party. That's why I know a lot of Greens won't agree with me, but I'm going to say my opinion anyway. I think we are far better off when the law lets us nominate by convention. Then they can't do that to us. And I know that's a bone of contention in Maine. So maybe it's not fair for me to say that and have nobody. But you know what? Minor party primaries are not useful. Generally, they're uncontested. And if they're not, the primary voters tend to not know what they're doing. My favorite example is from Alaska, 1986. A woman entered the Libertarian gubernatorial primary, and she said she'd spent $1 million on her campaign, but she was indicted for fraud and fled the state before the primary, but her name was still stuck on the ballot. But there was also a regular Libertarian on the primary ballot. He was the party's state chair. But the problem is the primary voters didn't know anything about Mary O'Bannon. She won the primary, even though she wasn't living in the state anymore. So the Libertarian Party had no campaign for governor. And if they had been allowed to nominate by convention, they would have been so much better off. And I've been missing some of these messages. I'm sorry. When I concentrate on talking, I can't read. So flash it again. Can Nevada?
Richard, we had a comment from another national co-chair, Anita Rios in Ohio. She was the only minor party candidate to ever secure ballot access in Ohio by getting over 3% of the vote. They are concerned about lobbying in the courts due to the fact that the legislature ignores what the courts say and are very secure in the status quo. For example, the DeRolf case regarding education funding. Did you have anything to add to that?
Well, you're right, except the law was weird. It said for the first year it was in operation, the vote test was 2%. But then after that, it was 3%. She made it, but I don't think she got 3%. It was good enough for her to get 2%. And that was great. But like I say, I do have hope that we can sue Ohio because of the Sixth Circuit Graveline decision. But it's probably better if we sue Tennessee first. I've been trying for months and months and months to get a case going for the Libertarian Party against the Tennessee party petition, which is 2.5% of the last gubernatorial vote, and no one's ever done it. And the reason I'm suggesting the Libertarian Party is the plaintiff in Tennessee is that we had a case with the Green Party and the Constitution Party, which won in the U.S. District Court 3 times. And the first 2 times, the state appealed and the Sixth Circuit sent it back for more facts. The 3rd time it went back, unfortunately, our great judge had retired and it went to a new judge who turned out to be very hostile, and he ruled against it. So if the Green Party were to sue Tennessee again, they'd say res judicata, you already tried this. So it's better if the Libertarian Party does it. And I've been trying to persuade this law professor, Bob Bastris of West Virginia, to sue Tennessee. And he says he will, but it's just taken forever. I think we should sue Tennessee first and win that case before we sue Ohio, because Ohio is 1% of the last gubernatorial or presidential vote. So we just have to be patient.
Richard, one important success I think that's important to talk about is in Montana. What happened there was that the Democrats, after the Green petition was turned in, they started going around and doing what they did in North Carolina, which was to try to get people to revoke their signatures. And they actually got the state Supreme Court to accept that. And it was actually the point where we turned the petition in March. And then they're getting people to do backsies on signatures after the primary was over in June, after our candidate had already been nominated. This is in July and August. They were still getting people to do backsies on their signatures, which is absurd. It was almost like they could have actually done it, according to the state Supreme Court, up to the day before the ballots were printed, by their logic. And what happened was the state legislature passed a law that only allowed that signatures to be withdrawn until the day the petition was due. And so all we have to do is just turn our petition in on that day. It makes it very hard for them to do that anymore.
Yes, unfortunately, the legislature did that too late to help for the 2020 election. Oh, I'm sorry, Anita. I underestimated you. I'm glad you got 3.3%. Thank you. Good for you. You didn't need to get 3%, however. You just needed 2%, but you did great. I hope you get a chance to do it again. But getting back to Montana, we had the last laugh because after the 2 elections that we were cheated out of or over, the Ninth Circuit said the law was unconstitutional. So that's why the Green Party's on the ballot in Montana this year. Oh yes, the Libertarian Party of Maine did make some headway with the lawsuit. You're right. Now, but it's still miserably hard to get 2,000 people, even if they can be registered independents as well as registered Greens or Libertarians, to sign a primary petition. That's why I wish we could work for letting small qualified parties in Maine and Massachusetts nominate by convention. Both states have the initiative process, and the Massachusetts initiative is the easiest statewide initiative in the country. I dream about doing another initiative in Massachusetts to fix that problem sometime.
Okay.
That question about endorsing, if the Green Party is permitted to nominate by convention, you don't need to worry about outsiders who don't necessarily support Green Party ideals grabbing your nomination. Well, I'm sort of surprised that we're going on so long because I thought there was another thing following this that starts now. Am I mixed up?
There is at 4. I think let's give everyone, I think it looks like the questions are kind of petering out here. So, and I think you want to be on in half an hour. So it's about time to thank you and everyone who's participated in this, Richard.
Okay, I really thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. Thank you. You did me a big favor. So when will we be reconvening?
Let's see. That's at 4, I think, isn't it?
Okay, I'll click back on. Hope it works better this time.
Yeah.
I'll leave now, okay?
All right, thanks.
Okay, bye.